Hi, everyone. We're so glad you're joining us for another episode of Writers Chat. We are always thrilled to be here on Tuesday mornings and looking forward to today's guest and the presentation. My name is Johnny Alexander. I'm joined today by my best co-hosts, Melissa Stroh, Brandy Bro, and Jean Wise. So we're going to turn it over to Melissa to introduce our special guest for today.
Hi, everyone. It's awesome to welcome back Hope Bollinger to our group. She has been on Writers Chat before and just is a wealth of information. And I've enjoyed getting to know her over the years. And so we're excited to have her join us today. Just for those who aren't familiar with Hope, Hope is a managing and acquisitions editor at Endgame Press. And she has written more than 1,300 of her works, which have been featured in various publications ranging from Writer's Digest to Keys for Kids to Hooked to Crosswalk.com. She's worked for various publishing companies, magazines, newspapers, and literary agencies, and has edited the works of authors such as Jerry B. Jenkins and Michelle Medlock Adams. 18 of her books are under contract or out now with traditional publishers, and she hopes more of her stories will find a home soon. And you can find out more about Hope at her website, hopebollinger.com. Today, she's going to join us to do a little Q&A about co-authoring and share a bit about that process with us. So welcome back, Hope. We're just excited to hear about this topic.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be back.
Yeah. So can you give us a little bit of an intro on what is, co-authoring, and, we're wondering about, how do you make the decision to jump into co-authoring? What first led you to decide to do that?
Yeah, absolutely. So hi, everyone. So co-authoring essentially is when you and another author write a book together or write some sort of large work together. And honestly, I'm going to be honest with you, I'm more of an independent type of person. I had tried the co-authoring thing beforehand with a number of authors. I just never was able to click with anyone. So how I eventually was able to start writing projects with Alyssa Roat, who is unable to be with us here today, is we actually started with a small project together. We went to the same college together. So we did a small assignment together, an article. And after we discovered that we really enjoyed writing that together, we figured, okay, if we can start small, maybe we can bring this up to a bigger scale. And we kind of went from there. So a lot of probably what we're going to talk about today is figuring out who is a good fit for you and how to know when you're clicking with someone. But I guess that's that in a nutshell.
Does anybody else have any initial questions before we?
Yeah, I just think it's got to be difficult because sometimes these are our friends, too, aren't they? I'm not sure. I love Johnny. I'm going to pick on Johnny. I love Johnny, but I think we could work together, Johnny. But you think you could, but I wouldn't want to ruin a friendship.
Oh, for sure. And honestly, one of the first people I ever tried to co-write a book with was a friend in high school, best friend, and that did not go well because we just had both had very different visions for what we wanted to do with this book, and it kind of clashed. So I would say a lot of it ends up being giving up control and being okay with giving up control. I'm going to talk a little bit about, I'm sure later we'll talk a little bit about the Dear Hero series and how a lot of it is improvisational writing. And so I'm not a pantser at all. I'm an outliner. So Alyssa probably is cracking up if she's watching this because it took a lot of kind of growth for me to be able to surrender a lot of control and say, okay, I don't know what Alyssa's character is going to say next, and whatever they say is going to alter the story. So I'm going to have to kind of roll with the punches with that. So yeah, again, like writing with friends can be a tricky place to navigate. Alyssa and I are very close friends now. But yeah, finding that right fit can be tricky, but once you do find a good fit, it is wonderful.
So do you think some of it starts right from the beginning to talk about, or what's some tips for us to find this right person?
Honestly, I would suggest starting with a smaller project just to see if you click, doing a short story, doing an article, maybe a devotional together. Just because and there are actually a couple other co-authors who I'm currently working on some proposals with so this can work with other people. You don't just have to find that one person. It's funny because Alyssa says I'm cheating on her as a co-author right now, doing some projects with other people. But I think it does help to start small. So with some of these other authors that we're kind of testing each other out, we're doing like a proposal together and we're having to kind of work on that. So I would say that's the best microcosm to experiment and see if you are a good fit. Because sometimes, you know, you might have two personalities that really work well together, and sometimes you don't necessarily have that. So I would say that's the best place to kind of start, would be try something small.
I was kind of wondering, I Hope, when you're when you're trying to figure that out. Now you're writing both fiction and nonfiction with different people, right?
Yep.
You find one of those easier than the other to find that person that fits? Is it easier, do you think, to co-author a nonfiction book rather than a fiction book, or an article rather than a short story?
No, this is a great question. Honestly, I'm going to say, so what comes easier to me from a writing perspective is fiction, but what comes easier for me from a co-writing perspective is actually nonfiction. And why I say nonfiction is because nonfiction is very structural. So if you kind of lay that structure out ahead of time, saying, okay, we're writing this Christian living book right here. It's going to have, you know, this is how we're going to kind of roughly do the opener. This is what we want in the closer and everything. And we roughly want it to hit around this word count. Then, you know, you can kind of set each other loose or tackle chapters together. I think from an organizational standpoint, at least for me personally, that would be easier. I think fiction can be harder because in fiction, because there's so much liberty, because there's so much flexibility in terms of what you can do with characters and plot, you two may not be on the same wavelength at the same time. So there's the reason why Alyssa and I frequently will get onto calls during our lunchtime. We like to pretend to be coworkers because we don't really have many coworkers. There's a reason why we get onto calls, so we can kind of basically catch each other up to speed where we are in the story and where we would like it to go. There's a lot of communication that has to happen.
So do you have like a routine that you follow of calling each other once a week or touching base, or how do you structure that logistics behind it?
Yeah, so honestly, Alyssa and I just call each other every day anyway, because it's our basically lunchtime call. But I would say when it is a book project, usually a good chunk of that call is dedicated to talking about what is happening in the book. We also have a time before we start writing the book where we will talk about different things we want to see show up, because we write two very different types of fiction together. We write the chat fiction, which is a lot more pantsing, and we write the romances, the sweet romances, which is a lot more outlining because those have to be very structured. So if it's a sweet romance, we will meet about a month ahead of time before the book, and we'll kind of talk out, okay, here are the plot points we want to hit. And if it is a chat fiction, we're going to talk about some of the characters, some of the world, and what we would like to see in the story. So we do talk ahead of time to make sure that we have a game plan going forward.
I don't know what a chat fiction
Yeah, I
is.
don't either.
Yeah. So it's a very popular type of fiction that's kind of breaching the YA genre. It's basically fiction told all through text messages.
Of course.
So it got popularized by the app Hooked. And so Alyssa and I started kind of experimenting with it right when it was kind of entering into the YA domain. But basically in our chat fiction books, it's mostly told through text messages. Sometimes we have voice recordings if, you know, they're in person, but it's all told through chat bubbles.
Wow.
That's kind of like,
cool.
That's
I was
cool.
gonna say, it's kind of like a modern rendition of the Screw Tape letters that CS
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Wow. That
I'm
is something.
thinking about when you were talking about fiction, though. I mean, like you're co-authoring, so it's you and you know your co-author. But then I don't know about you, but my characters are always talking to me too. So I can see this just being like a crowd. All of a sudden. And are they saying the same thing to you that they're saying to the co-writer? You know?
Oh
Or-
yeah, no, and this is a good point too, because sometimes, you know, if we make little discoveries along the way, we have a chat going back and forth between me and her, and I'll say, hey, what if this character does this? I'm thinking this. And usually we say, okay, that sounds good, let's do it. Or we'll say, okay, I'm not sure about that because it's conflicting with this. So we do talk through those things when we do make those discoveries. There were certain chats I stumbled across in Dear Hero, and we were kind of figuring it out, where she made a huge character discovery. The next day I said, okay, I guess this person's a villain now. So we have to kind of roll with that. But it is kind of fun, you know, the improvisational aspect of that does kind of help me to grow as a writer, just because I'm not really geared that way. So it kind of helps stretch me in good ways.
Good, good.
That's good. We've got some people in the chat are thinking about, authors have contributed compilations, you know, where they've just put a single something in. How does that differ from co-authoring? How would you contrast that?
So are we talking about like anthologies versus
Yeah.
co-authoring? Yep. Oh, sure, for sure. So I'm in a number of anthologies too. I would say co-authoring, usually you don't see in a book, the label co-authoring usually only applies to two authors. So it's usually two authors tackling one big book. What an anthology is usually a compilation of, devotionals or short stories that follow a certain theme. So for instance, at Endgame, we're currently compiling a fiction anthology for sweet romance. That's sweet romance that happens during different holidays and different seasons. So authors can kind of have free reign for kind of which holidays they choose, which characters they introduce. The characters don't have to be the same across the stories. In fact, we're encouraging them not to. Also, I'm so sorry if you hear my super vocal cat. He likes to be on video calls too. So I would say that's kind of the main difference between the two, is that anthologies tend to be very separate storylines. And as a co-author relationship, you have to work within the same story framework together.
And that brings up the whole topic of voice.
Oh, yeah.
And so how do you blend the voice when you're co-authoring? Because you really can't have, well, I have read some things where it's been two distinct voices, but most the co-authoring, I think it's been the same voice. So do you have some tips for us on that?
Yeah, so kind of how Alyssa and I get away with this essentially is, first of all, we have a very similar voice. So she and I have a lot of humor in our writing. We have kind of very snarky Gen Z humor in our writing. So we had very similar voices to start. But what it kind of comes down to is, if we're talking about the sweet romances, we have dual POV. So I'm always the guy, except I think in our most recent book we're going to write, I'm going to finally be the girl. So I'm almost always the guy in that. And then in our chat fiction, we kind of pick characters. So we start with the two main characters, the two love interests. And then as characters get introduced, we kind of claim them as our own. So this is kind of how we're able to work slightly distinctive voices. And I know not all co-authoring relationships work like that. Sometimes co-authors may kind of trade characters. They may just kind of flip-flop who is doing what. So I can't really speak to that necessarily, just because I'm used to doing the dual POV, but that is kind of how Alyssa and I are able to mix very similar voices together in a book.
So what would happen in fiction? I mean, nonfiction, in nonfiction.
No, this is a good question, because I'm slightly exploring this. I'm currently putting together a proposal with another author for a Christian living book. And she and I do have also very similar voices in terms of humor. I think in a nonfiction book, because what she and I are doing is we're breaking it down topically, and we're kind of choosing different topics that we're going to write. But there are some chapters that we are co-writing. So we're kind of navigating that right now to figure out similar voices and similar verbiage. So I think it all comes down to the editing process, really, and making sure that everything does flow naturally. And I've read lots of nonfiction books that are by two authors, and you can kind of sometimes tell when there are two distinct voices. I think what it just comes down to, if the structure is very similar and the research is kind of very similar and the whole process seems to be similar, I'm okay with slightly distinctive voices if I'm running into like a Christian nonfiction type of book.
Okay. So one of the questions Bethany asked, and I just always think it's kind of good, is whose name goes first on the front of the book? I think, doggone it. Johnny and I wrote together, and we went in alphabetical order. It wouldn't be fair, So
yeah. I usually say Alyssa can go before me. I don't really care. Yeah, they're going to be the same size on the cover. So I think, this is a very big difference between co-authoring with like James Patterson and something, because obviously his name's going to be this big on the cover and yours is going to be right here. So our names are always the same size. So I don't personally care. I'm sure that's something you could talk with your co-author about, but I just went ahead and volunteered that she could go before me.
Well, let me add something to that, because we write, the Mosaic Collection does 2 short story collections a year, so anthologies. And when I'm in that, there is a tendency, because of alphabetical order, for me to be first, but it truly gives an advantage. So I have said now, don't always put me first, even if I'm in the anthology, because I think it's Goodreads that they'll put only one author name. Like Amazon will put me first, and then others, and then they'll say plus maybe 5 more. So if you're at the bottom, your name's not even going to be on that heading. And I think with Goodreads, it's only like one name and then plus more. So, I mean, you really do get an advantage if your name is first on something like that. But I'm like Hope. It's like, it's always nice to be the one, but it's like, okay, I've had that privilege. Let's let's share this a little bit. Let someone else also get that extra recognition.
So if you're going to co-author, change your name. Don't be Wise, be Aaron.
Yes.
AA. Oh,
Or I wonder about, and I don't know whether anyone has done this. I suppose someone probably has, even if there's more than one author, just choosing one name to,
Yep. Oh yeah, there is an example. So there was a Warriors Cat series and it's still going strong, but I had read this back in 5th grade. And I don't remember if it's somewhere between 3 to 6 authors who contributed to this, but they all go under the name of Aaron Hunter. And
Oh.
so that can be a thing that I have seen done before. So that is also a possibility to do too.
You know what? The Bobbsey twins, I think, and like maybe even Nancy Drew.
Nancy
That
Drew.
It was written
Yeah.
like that. Yeah, there was just one, but I think different authors were writing different stories, so that is kind of different. But yeah, they just used the one author
That's
name.
creative. That's very creative approach to that.
Yeah.
No, there's another thing I heard of as far as like division of labor I was in Jerry Jenkins Guild, where when he co-authors a book, he has the other author do the writing and he edits it.
Yeah.
So are there different other ways to contribute to a co-authoring apart from those?
Oh yeah. So I mean, obviously you're talking about like a James Patterson sort of model where James may give like the type of story that he wants to see and the author will do that. So I have seen that done before. So yeah, co-authoring obviously is not just you partnering with another author. It can also kind of look like that. I think there is a new publisher, not new, but a publisher that's doing that same model with famous Christian authors. I think it's called Sunrise Publishing. Could be
Yes.
one. I need to
This was
look that up. But
Susan Warren.
yeah, they basically a very high platform Christian author will partner with a new upcoming author and they will collaborate on a book together. So we are seeing that model a lot more. I will say that is something I would definitely love to explore down the road because I think that'd be really interesting. But yeah, so yeah, the model of co-authoring can look different. People kind of have switched it up a little bit. So obviously the definition we established at the beginning doesn't just cover everything that could go under that.
I like the first one though. That seems more fun, especially from a pantser fiction standpoint, to kind of role play off of each other and create different characters. So that one kind of appeals to me anyway.
Oh, it's so fun. It's so fun. We write these, we just have a blast writing these. I could write them forever.
Oh, wow. Do you have like written agreement with your co-author, or how do you set this up? I can just see how, again, I guess I'm thinking pessimistic today that I don't want to ruin a friendship, but do you put something in writing or some sort of agreement, or what do you do with that?
We probably should, but we haven't. I'm really close with Alyssa, so I don't think we ever thought to. But I think if I were to partner with an author who I don't necessarily know as well, I probably would put something down into writing. I don't know necessarily what that would look like, honestly. And if anyone wants to contribute, maybe what would be good to look at in terms of that, maybe like having an exit clause or something if it's just not working out. But yeah, that actually could be interesting to kind of investigate because I don't know what other co-author pairs kind of do with that, depending on how close they are with the person, I guess how much they trust the person that they are working with.
I think there'd be deadlines. I think that might be
Yeah.
something you would want to include in a contract, especially if you were doing like a nonfiction, different chapters. You want to make sure those other chapters are going to get done.
For sure. Oh yeah.
Yeah, and I imagine if I was doing that too, like if I wrote chapters, then I would want to edit the other person's chapters, or at least
I was going to ask.
read them over and proof them.
Yeah.
And for them to do the same for mine. I mean, I think that would be
Oh yeah. And then we definitely have an editing process. Once we finish the first draft, we will put things through edits, and we are pretty merciless with one another, which is good. Obviously you want to be when you're editing each other, but yeah, that is definitely a part of the process that we both undergo, especially if we've worked with the publisher that we are working with our sweet romances. We know exactly what that publisher is looking for. So if there's something in the text that we know they're not going to like, we're going to point that out to the other person. So yeah, I think, deadlines also, I'm glad you actually mentioned that because that is huge. Alyssa and I have a pretty similar work ethic in terms of being able to turn things in on time. We usually do kind of have a calendar set up for when we do want to finish a book. But yeah, that was an issue I did run into in previous co-authoring relationships was I would contribute, my chapters, and then we wouldn't see anything from the other person. So yeah, I could see it where an agreement would be important in a relationship like that.
So I think the quicker you do that up front, even if it's verbal, to say, this is what we're going to do. This is the calendar. We will edit each other. I was in a group, a local group here that we put together kind of an anthology. So it was a little bit different. And some of them were new writers and they were shocked that we were editing them. You know, they didn't want their babies edited. Well, you guys all know everybody's edited in this business, but it was so new for them. They had no idea. And that really had some conflicts within the group because of that. So I think the clearer you are at the beginning, probably the better on that.
Sophia brought up another comment that's kind of along this vein. So like, what if for some unfortunate reason the partnership did fail? Would one get to run with the story or not? Or would the story just kind of disappear?
Yeah, no, I mean, and that's honestly something you do talk about ahead of time. I know that Alyssa's about to pursue her master's. So we've talked about other future chat fiction books we'd like to write down the road. And depending on if our publisher wants to see more or not, we've talked about how, okay, well, if Alyssa's not available to write this, Hope is just going to single-handedly write this project while she's getting her master's. So I would say that is either something verbally or on paper that you would want to define ahead of time. The question also comes up if someone has contributed anything to it, you probably have to eradicate whatever the other person has contributed if you're going to call it your own. So yeah, definitely terms to mention ahead of time. I don't think I've ever been in a co-authoring relationship where we got almost to the close of the project and it fell through. I've been in some where we got a couple chapters in and it just wasn't working out. So we just decided to scrap the project. But if you're kind of getting to that point and it's just really not working out between the two of you, that's definitely something to establish probably at the beginning.
We had some couple questions on chat fiction
Yeah.
again about the
I was
length
going to.
and where and who publishes those things and the length and the audience. I guess it sounds like more young adult.
Oh yeah, so definitely young adult. It's kind of between that young adult and new adult bridge that we've seen, but essentially what our books are, and it's going to sound like a short word count, but let me explain why it's not. So there's 60,000 words long, but here's why that is actually a long word count, why the books end up being almost 400 pages long, is because if you look at a stage play, a full-length stage play, we're talking about 20,000 words. So to put together one of these books, it's essentially like writing 3 full stage-length plays in one. So how basically it works, I'll just kind of walk you through our process is there are some chapters we may write separately. So maybe we'll have 2 of our own characters aside having a conversation. But when we are writing together our together chapters, we'll be on a document. We'll usually be on the phone at the same time to kind of talk through things. And then we will write dialogue a line at a time. And the dialogue is supposed to progress the plot forward. It's supposed to establish setting. It's supposed to do all of that stuff that you would normally do in a story. And we do that until we finish our chapter for the day. And that's kind of the format that we're doing right now with that. So usually we each have a separate chapter we have to write each day and then a together chapter that we write as well. And those usually have like a certain word count that we're aiming for those in terms of pacing. So I know it's very scientific. We kind of have figured out what works for the 2 of us, but yeah, so that is kind of chat fiction. It's basically just telling a story. It's like a play, just over text messages, essentially.
Wow.
So are they actually formatted in like bubbles then when, like, if I would open that book, they would be like.
Yeah, so it depends on which publisher. We did have these books with a publisher originally. The publisher ended up closing, so we have a new house. So the formatting may look different across the formats. We're about to have a new cover reveal for the new house that took us on. But yeah, they will usually kind of put them at least left aligned, right aligned. So it looks like you're on kind of a Facebook Messenger type of chat. That's what we're going to be seeing for sure.
Wow.
60,000 words seems long to me for something like that, actually. I mean, I write 55,000 word novels all the time. So I know what that is. I
For
can't
sure.
imagine writing 60,000 of only dialogue. I mean, that's.
Oh yeah, and like we have, we do have in-person scenes. So you may have some onomatopoeia for action beats that are happening in the background or background noises. We do still try to incorporate the 5 senses and everything. You kind of have to experiment a little bit to get some of that same description that you would in a kind of a prose sort of book. But I think the interesting thing about young adult, and for anyone who writes young adult in this or is thinking about it, is that a lot of the genre now is experimentation, kind of trying new stuff to draw teen readers in. And so this is just kind of an example of an experimentation to give them something that they haven't seen before.
And a great example with something you could co-author with. I mean, it's a
Oh,
perfect
yeah.
format on that. It's
Oh yeah, for sure. And there was a book that I think came out either a year or two before ours. I don't recommend reading it because it's risque, but it was in the new adult genre. It's called I Hate Everyone But You. And I think what essentially it was the two authors got onto a Google Doc and they started writing text messages, and that's how they created the book. So this is how we knew it was possible to do it. We just decided to do it with superheroes and less risque content. So yes.
That's amazing. That's amazing and stuff. But Leslie asked, what happens if you keep the deadline, but your co-author doesn't? What do you think, what would happen with the publisher on that? I mean,
Yeah, no, that's a good question. Because sometimes publishers can be a little bit forgiving with deadlines if you turn it in like a week early or something, depending on which publisher you're with. But yeah, I mean, that is where, I think those preliminary stages are so important in figuring out, even like when you do maybe a short story together, give them a deadline and see if they meet it. And if they don't, that could be a precursor to what's going to happen in the future. So that can happen depending on which co-author you're with. And obviously we all write at different speeds and everything. So you need to have a reasonable deadline in there. With our sweet romance publisher, she gave us some pretty tight deadlines. We had to write 3 books in 1 year together, and we did end up doing it, but it was it was a little bit stringent for the two of us. So definitely, I guess also when that contract comes from the publisher, trying to figure out what is a deadline both of us are going to be able to meet, because what deadline I may be able to meet may not be what Alyssa can meet, because I'm crazy. So we have to kind of figure out what will work for both of us.
it goes back to good communication. Really.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And cooperation.
Oh yeah. It's basically, it's like a friendship, and in a friendship, you're going to have to coordinate all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So were there like any misconceptions that you two had about co-authoring when you first came together that kind of came to mind when you first got started? Or
Oh yeah.
Sure.
And honestly, Alyssa and I mentioned the same thing in our answers because she sent some answers ahead of time. We thought it was going to be way harder than it turned out to be. And I think when you find that right fit, it ends up being wonderful. So we had heard horror stories from people about co-authors that just did not click. And so we were worried that this was going to ruin our friendship and that everything, but it ended up being so much more fun. I often equate co-authoring to tennis. I don't know if we have any tennis players in here, but I played doubles back in high school, and I loved doubles way better than singles because you had a partner to encourage you to get ground strokes that you couldn't get to. And that's what co-authoring is that you have that personal encouragement with you all the time. So I don't think anyone kind of warned us how fun it was going to be. There's a reason why it's harder now to write our own books. Whenever we have to write by ourselves, we're like, Alyssa, I really want you to do this book with me. Can you like help me out, please? It's so much harder to write on your own now.
Wow. And I would think the whole process, including just fleshing out the theme and the brainstorming and the organization and the plot, just everything, the characters, I think the brainstorming would be very cool with somebody else kind of on your same wavelength on that.
Oh, for sure. And honestly, we bring out the best sides of each other. I've always said that our books that we write between ourselves are a lot funnier and a lot lighter. And I think the thing is we're trying to make the other person laugh as we're doing it. So we tend to bring out the best sides of each other when we're co-authoring. It's kind of like I used to run to, so we're going to be using all these sports analogies, but I would be able to run longer distances when I ran with someone. And I think that's what co-authoring is too.
Wow. It's a great image. It's a great image. I don't know what other questions. Brandy, you got a question coming up at all?
Actually, you guys are talking about all of the things that are coming to mind. One of my earlier questions was, well, do you split up the roles? And you guys talked about that. So I'm listening, absorbing, and thinking about what other things I have in my head. I'm also thinking about a story that I wrote with 2 other authors, and that was a challenge. So yeah, this is a great topic. I'm keep listening, and if I come up with something, I will chime in.
Yeah.
I saw a question earlier. Are publishers, excuse me, more apt to give contracts to co-authored books or anthologies, I assume, over individually written books?
Yeah, no, that's a good question because I can tackle this from a publisher perspective. I think it depends on which publisher, because I know a lot of publishers don't necessarily do anthologies, although there are some that specifically will do anthologies. As a publisher, if someone comes to me as a co-author pair, I don't think I would choose a co-author pair over an author or an author over a co-author pair. I think what matters to me is the story itself. I think what would be encouraging to me as a publisher is I would know that, they're kind of dividing the work evenly. So if they have a good co-authoring relationship, I can expect that they'll probably hit those deadlines pretty quickly. I would say if I was from like a royalties person perspective, if I was in those numbers, that may be a little bit trickier to kind of divide all those royalties amongst authors, but I don't think publishers necessarily have a preference. I think they're just looking for good stories that they love to see in their lineup.
I imagine the percentage for royalty for the writers just split in half then, isn't it? Okay. It's not increased because there's two of them.
Oh yeah.
I was trying to hopefully maybe be increased. But
Oh yeah. And that's one of the downsides to co-authoring is you do split everything. But the upside is that means you split marketing, you split editing, you split kind of the parts that you're not necessarily as looking forward to in the process together.
Mhm.
So
That
when you're
kind of-
co-authoring, do you formulate your idea first and start writing first, or do you approach a publisher first with your idea, or does that really depend upon your project?
Yeah, so for the most part, especially in the world of fiction, you do have to have a completed project to approach a publisher. I will say if it's in a series, you can, say, okay, we have other books in the series, and depending on the publisher, they may want it all written, or they may be okay to take something on concept. So I would say most of the time you do have to write it ahead of time. Although we're going to kind of see with the new publisher that picked us up, they did want a spin-off for the Dear Hero series. So we're currently writing a book right now. We're about, I think, 5,000 words out from being done, which involves kind of Greek mythology characters right now. And it's been really fun to write because I'm a ancient Greek nerd. But I think depending on the publisher, she may require us, if we have other spin-off ideas, to have the whole thing done, or she may take something on concept. So we're going to have to kind of figure that out. It totally depends on the publisher, but most of the time it will need to be done if it is fiction. If it's nonfiction, that is a different story.
Wow. Amazing.
So like in the area of, strengths and weaknesses that each one brings to the table, what were some of the unique strengths and weaknesses that you guys discovered that's really helped it?
Oh yeah, well I can tell you my weaknesses. Yeah, so my weakness is copy editing, which is where Alyssa's strength is. So I am never good at proofreading. I am not good at that. I forget commas and stuff all the time. She's amazing at that. She's very good at the minute details. I'm more of our big picture gal. So I'm our ideas kind of person. In terms of weaknesses, Alyssa really doesn't have a whole lot. I can say she may get a little bit more overwhelmed about deadlines than I can. So we kind of have to adjust schedules depending on that. But honestly, what the other person's weakness is, our strength tends to be the other person, which is why I think the co-authoring relationship really works. Again, I'm going to throw it back to tennis. I had certain tennis partners where I could get all the high stuff because I'm like 5'10", and they were really good at getting all the stuff at the net. And so, so I think, that part of vetting, I guess, a co-author is figuring out, okay, what are their weaknesses, and do my strengths personally supplement the weaknesses I'm seeing, and vice versa.
I think it would especially be helpful in like the marketing area, where if you have hesitancies about it or uncertainties, that you two can like kind of brainstorm that. Have you come up with really good ideas through co-author brainstorming?
For sure. There's actually the co-author who I'm doing the nonfiction project with, and I really do hope we can end up writing this whole thing together, is she is very good at having a booth at a conference and just talking to everyone. I am not that kind of person. I get really shy and stuff, but I like speaking events, and she doesn't. So what's really cool is, we can travel to conferences together. She can set up a booth for us and get talking, and I can go lead some talks other places. So I totally agree. Marketing, that definitely comes in. With Alyssa, I'm scared to reach out to reviewers. I get really hesitant to do it, and she's totally fine with it. So I end up doing kind of the cover reveal stuff, and she does our review side of things. So yes, there are definitely marketing tasks that we'll split up depending on strengths in terms of that too.
Great. That's great. Talk again a little bit more about nonfiction. How you said you're doing a proposal now, so you kind of feeling each other out. How are you going to divide that work up?
Yeah, so what we've done is we already have the chapter outline. And so we've claimed different chapters that we want to write on. And this is a subject that we're both extremely passionate about. So any of us could write about any of these chapters. But how we're dividing that work, especially when it comes to the proposal, because if anyone's done a nonfiction proposal, you usually have 3 chapters. So we're each going to write a chapter a piece, and then we're going to co-author a chapter just to kind of give a sampling of the 3 of those. And we've already picked which 3 chapters we're going to be writing on for that sample. So I don't know if that helps answer that question, but that's kind of essentially what we've divided the work as. We've already kind of talked about how we're going to do interviews, how we're going to collect research together. But we did talk through all that stuff ahead of time. So if someone does pick this up, we have a game plan for how we're going to move forward.
Well, I found writing nonfiction, sometimes as I write the chapters, the format kind of changes sometimes, the subheadings change, or questions at the end, or something, prompts or something as I get into it, it falls into place. And I'm thinking is sometimes you're the initial part, 1 or 2 of you may find a different rhythm as you write these. So again, I guess it goes back to the communication.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Communication is going to end up being our favorite word in this chat. But yeah, I would say so, especially because as we're writing these sample chapters, we're probably going to start kind of developing what that rhythm is. So if we're going to run into things saying, I don't know, hope this feels kind of inorganic, I feel like this would be a better way to format it. It's good to kind of write those first 3 chapters to get an idea of what is going to work, what isn't going to work. So yeah, I completely agree. Communication is huge in this for sure.
How are you going to write the chapters together?
This is a good question. So I think, so we have obviously divided the chapters by subsections, what we're looking for. So I think we're going to claim different subsections for the chapters that we're going to write. And I think we're going to kind of alternate which ones. So not everyone is writing that opener, and not everyone's writing those discussion questions at the end. So this is a good question. I kind of have to wait for her to finish her deadline for the current book she's writing in May, which is another good thing to bring up too. What happens if your co-author has projects they're writing individually and have deadlines for those? How do you work around those? Because Alyssa and I have had to kind of navigate this, because when we started our co-authoring relationship, we did not have contracts for anything. So we didn't necessarily have to navigate that, but now we have contracts for individual projects as well as co-authoring. So figuring out a schedule months in advance that works for the both of you is really, really helpful, especially if they end up getting behind on their writing. And putting some buffer time in there is also helpful too, in case something happens. It's always good to have that.
Good point. Good point. Johnny, you've done that where you've had contracts come up in multiples all of a sudden, which is a blessing, but still balance.
Yes. Yeah. I've got quite a few going on right now, in fact, which is a little scary, but yeah, it's fun. I was going to ask Hope, I know you used to do agenting, and I don't think you're doing agenting anymore, right? But do you and your co-author Alicia, do you have the same agent to work to represent you, or what about if your co-author has a different agent? What would
No, so this is a good question, because I dealt with both situations as an agent. So Alyssa is currently unagented, but I do have an agent. So anytime that one of my projects gets shopped around, she kind of ends up under the umbrella of like the co-authoring relationship right there. I think we had an individual contract with our agency for any of those co-authored types of things. I have represented clients before though, where an agent kind of released this client from this one book that they co-authored with them, but they were still under this agent. So that ended up being kind of tricky waters to navigate, because you try to figure out, okay, which agency is going to be on the agreement? Are both going to be on the agreement? Who is going to kind of negotiate those things? So I think it depends on the situation, but it can get tricky if both you have different agents. So that is something to talk with your agent about if you have that and you want to work with someone who has a different agent. It's still doable. I've done contracts with big houses with kind of my client co-authoring with another client who had a different agent, but it will kind of elongate the process. Their agent may negotiate a lot harsher than your agent may. They may just have a totally different strategy. So that can also involve a lot of communication between the agents too. So something to definitely keep in mind if you do want to start a project with someone.
Okay, good question. I have a co-authoring question, but I don't want to put that in till Brandy and Johnny and Melissa, if you guys have other questions.
The only one that popped up to my head, right, was kind of a springboard off of that. Was wondering what challenges you face co-authoring, and I think they're kind of touching on some of those. But are there other challenges apart from the communication and possible, contractor agent situations?
Yeah, honestly, I would just say the biggest thing is time, especially because when Alyssa and I started co-authoring, we were both still in college. So time looked way different in college than it does now with both of us having full-time jobs. So figuring out scheduling is honestly the hardest part, because honestly, most of it is wonderful. I would rather co-author a book than write a book on my own in most cases, especially with Alyssa. But yeah, the biggest thing is timing, especially if the person does have a full-time job, because it may just end up looking like if we're both on lunch break, we'll write during then, or it may be waiting until our work days are over and then writing then. But yeah, again, communication is huge for sure.
Mm-hmm. I think expectations, that's what I'm hearing too. Each
Oh, yeah.
other being him, clear, it's part of communication, but clear expectation on the project and on the relationship, on the work they were going to do. And I'm hearing in that from the very, very beginning.
Oh yeah. And anyone who has been apart from Alyssa, who I'm either currently working on a co-authored project with or hoping to, it has always involved long phone calls like this. It's always involved, entire Google Drive folders where we kind of lay out expectations, lay out what we're expecting of the characters, of the book. Yeah, I would definitely say it takes a lot more, I think, paperwork, I guess, than if you were to do an individual project on your own. It definitely, just because you have to kind of share half a vision with someone and have to make it work together.
So you mentioned Google Drive. Is that basically what you do, the kind of, what's the software, the behind the scenes thing that works?
Yeah, I
Oh,
was
yeah.
going to ask what other tools you use.
Oh yeah, Alyssa and I pretty much live in the Google Drive, just because, especially if we need to be on the document at the same time, whether we're applying edits at the same time or writing at the same time, Google Drive is helpful. I know before Google Drive, people used to pass Word documents back and forth via email. In terms of tools, I don't really know if we do a whole lot apart from the Drive. I'm sure it will hit me after this conversation. But I would say, yeah, the Drive is usually a good place, because we often will have even like our research for whatever the world is in a folder. We'll have our outline for what we want to accomplish in a separate document. So yeah, we definitely spend a lot of time in there for sure.
It sounds like something Scrivener, for those of you that have used Scrivener, that would work too for as far as research and organization and stuff. I'm not an expert.
Dropbox has paper too. That might be something that would work for some authors.
For sure. Oh yeah.
Yeah. Leslie asked about if co-authoring needed in all, is it needed in all fiction genres or just YA? And just was curious what sub genres would be looking for co-authored work. I thought that was a good question.
No, it's a good question. Honestly, I can't think of any book that you can't co-author. I've seen picture books co-authored. A lot of times, Michelle Medlock Adams is a great resource for that. She will co-author a lot of picture books together. And then I've seen it on up through pretty much any genre. I'm trying to think if there is a genre, unless you're doing even I've seen memoirs co-written before. So I don't think there is a genre that you can't co-author with. I think there are certain genres that may be more conducive to co-authoring, depending on if you are more of a heavy outliner or not. But I've seen it all done. So I don't think there's kind of a limitation on any of that.
I think one thing we've kind of talked around too is like there's this very intense co-authoring that you two gals are doing. And then there are these like anthologies or the novella collections that Barbara was, I'm not sure they're putting them out like they used to. They used to put out several a year where it was one theme and different authors would be in it. So I mean, I think there's this kind of almost what's the word I'm looking for, spectrum of co-authoring opportunities. One time, Jill Kimmerer and Jessica Patch, who both write for Love Inspired, put together a team of 10 authors, and it was like we each wrote a story, and I was invited to be involved with that. We wrote novellas that all took place in the same week on a matchmaking island where there was this matchmaking thing going on. And so there were like 2 continuous characters that showed up in each of those little novellas. So we weren't really co-authoring like that, but we were all kind of aware of each other's stories, and it was the same week, same place kind of thing, same theme. So there's just, I think with indie authors too, you can really just come up with these sort of plans and boxed sets and things like that. It's not quite the same as what Hope is talking about, but kind of touches on it, where you're writing your own story, but you have to be aware of the other people's stories too.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. And yeah, I'm glad you brought this up, because yeah, that's definitely a thing you will see a lot, especially with box sets that you mentioned, whether it's all in one setting or it's all happening at the same time, or it's all based around a certain theme, and you do have to know what other people are writing so you don't kind of contradict each other. Yeah, that's definitely that too. So what I love about co-authoring is it doesn't just have to be you and another author sitting down and writing a book. It can be a lot of other things as well.
How do you develop the characters? What do you do? Create a character sketch right at the beginning that this guy always dresses in navy blue and smokes a pipe, or what, you know, I would think it'd have to be created at the beginning, I would think.
Oh yeah, and honestly, so one strength that both of us have is we're both pretty good at characters. We're pretty good at creating distinctive characters. So we do talk through some characters, at least the main ones that we want to see initially. And usually if you have a romantic couple, you want them to complement each other in some way and kind of bolster each other's strengths and weaknesses. So sometimes we will create characters based on that. We have had certain characters who we kind of planned to be a certain way, and when they hit the screen, they decided to be a completely different way. So there was some adjusting when that happened, but we do try to plan as much as we can, but we also try to be flexible in case things happen. Because if any of us are fiction writers, we know the characters don't like to listen to us and they will do their own thing. So yeah, that is something you do have to kind of navigate together and kind of roll with the punches, make sure that everything is fitting within the plot, but also being willing to do something that you're not necessarily thinking is going to happen next.
That's exciting. That's exciting. Hey, my non-co-authoring question, which you put your other hat on, you're a publisher too. And so I think we have to pick your brain a little bit today about what you might be looking for and what's some trends that you might see in the industry. That's always, writers always want to know that question, I'm sure. But sort of what are you looking for as a publisher?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm currently in the fiction branch of Endgame, but I can kind of, I guess, speak to all of Endgame, what they're all looking for. So in the fiction side, I'm taking on middle grade through adult genres. I could tell you which genres we are not currently taking on, because that's going to kind of, we're taking on a number of genres. So I'll tell you what we're not taking on. At the moment, we're not taking on fantasy, science fiction, and horror. And I think that's kind of what we're not taking on. So what we're especially looking for are really intriguing stories that can especially hit that CBA, ABA divide. We're kind of looking for stories that are kind of in that middle ground, clean stories that have good Christian values. And honestly, what we also look for is an author who is pleasant to work with, because an author is a huge part of a publisher's decision. You can have a very wonderful story, but if you are just very hard to work with, a publisher may be just really hesitant to take someone on. So someone who has a teachable spirit and can be flexible in terms of stories that way. In terms of nonfiction and children's, we do take some picture books on. We also do have a picture book specific imprint called Run and Bear Books, run by Michelle Medlock Adams. Mm-hmm. And in nonfiction, I think we're aiming more for Christian living and kind of self-help books that are also hitting that ABA, CBA divide as well. So those are, I guess, what we are looking for at the moment at Endgame.
And trends, any new things coming that you could see that might give us a heads up?
Yeah, I mean, it really depends on the genre. I will say, okay, in terms of what Victoria loves, she loves mystery, suspense, thriller. If we can see more of that in the inbox, I think we'd be really excited. In terms of like young adults and middle grade, which is my heart personally, I think stories that are real, that have very real characters, that have characters of different abilities, different races, different backgrounds, just, so people can see themselves in the stories that you are writing. But honestly, the best way I can say to kind of see what is trending is to read books that have been published in the last 5 years and to read from a variety of publishers. So not just big five, but also what smaller publishers are putting out too, because there is an invisible hand effect that kind of moves with all publishers, whether we notice it or not. And so we do kind of all tend to be looking for similar stuff around the same time. So if you are reading up to date, you probably will be writing right around what we're going to be wanting to see.
Yeah. And they're asking in the chat, ABA and CBA. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So ABA is just a term for the non-Christian market. So anything that wouldn't fall under Christian market. CBA, it's a more dated term. It's now CRA, but basically Christian books. So something that can, have a very good Christian values, but can still hit those readers who may not necessarily be open to reading a Christian book. So think, Hallmark movies. There are a number of obscure books I can definitely list, but just think there are a lot of Christian publishers that are putting out stuff that kind of hits that middle ground right now. Anything by Caroline George, I would definitely recommend. Anything you see coming out from Enclave, if you're kind of in that sci-fi fantasy sort of realm. Anything coming out from Illuminate YA fiction. Chicken Scratch Books is a great middle grade resource to kind of see books that are supposed to hit that specific divide for middle grade. But yeah, pay attention to like Christian publishers, because a lot of them are trying to also hit this market as well.
I didn't know it was CRA. What's the R stand for?
I think retailers, I like CBA better just because CBA, ABA, but both can work, honestly.
I didn't know that. I didn't know that had changed and stuff. Do we want to invite people back on, or do you guys have a final question at all? Why don't you come on back out of the chat and come back in and see if anybody has questions or anything that we missed in the chat with that. So come on back in. We got some people off camera. If you want to come on back on, is Yvonne. There they come back on. You guys have any questions, go ahead and unmute. And if you're stuck in Writer's Chat jail, as we call it, I don't know. I know I didn't take anybody out, but if you can't get back on, just give us a quick message and we'll get you out of Writer's Chat jail and stuff.
It's Johnny that likes to put people in jail, right, Johnny?
Ah,
He's
Yeah,
not the only one.
yes, Johnny's, but she is usually the one who puts me in jail.
we'll get mad at Johnny today.
I just thought I'd cry while I could.
Oh. Questions, you guys have questions that we didn't go to or did we miss?
This was outstanding.
Interesting, isn't it? Just-
Yeah,
It's stuff. It was a lot of rich. It's a whole area that I had not considered and all that. I don't know. Hope if we did, we talked about separate fiction versus nonfiction. I don't know if you could.
yeah.
It would have to depend on the project. I'm thinking like Johnny's almost solely fiction and I'm almost solely nonfiction. What project could we come up with, Johnny? Think about.
I think it would be awesome if the two of you joined.
I don't know. We'd have to come up with the topic, wouldn't we? Hope first.
For sure. And honestly, yeah, I think what you mentioned is having worked together before on something is usually a good indicator where you can, investigate co-authoring. Because any of the people that I am currently investigating and co-authoring a project with, I've worked with them to some capacity, whether it was from an agenting perspective, whether it was from an editing perspective, but all these people who I am co-authoring with, there was an established relationship ahead of time. And I think that is huge too.
Yeah.
Questions, guys, while you're here. We got Hope here. We could ask her anything.
If there isn't one, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Melissa.
No, if your question, what I was going to say was going to be a little off topic. So if you have a question on topic, go ahead.
What I'm struggling with right now, most of you know that I was very ill for the last, well, it's been almost 3 years now. So I'm the one who has just lost a platform totally. Anything I had was canceled, rescheduled, and then hacked on my laptop. So now I'm starting all over again. What are some words of encouragement? Because I will tell you, I have been quite discouraged.
That is hard. It's hard.
Yeah, for sure. And from a publishing perspective, because I know a lot of times people like to say platform all the time.
Right.
But from a publishing
Mhm.
perspective, if we see that, first of all, if you explain the situation to us, will come from an understanding perspective, but also if we're seeing growth, that is something that's way more important to us than numbers, honestly. So that is something I hope that is encouraging, that we are looking far more for someone who is growing something versus someone who, has a certain huge number of followers.
Okay.
It's also, she brings a wealth of experience because she's had that in the past. And I think that's puts you way ahead of a newbie on the block too, Yvonne. So that's always considered on that.
Well, when you have your tax man telling you to retire and a best friend saying, oh, you've written enough, you were out there long enough, you ran hard.
Well,
Give
this
it
might,
up.
this might be a good place to just, wow, especially while we're on the recording, to talk about next week too, you know, when we meet next week. That actually what we were going to talk about next week is have an open mic where we talk about some of our fears and discouragement and questions that we have on our writer's journey. So I hope you can join us next week, Iman, because maybe we could talk about that a little bit more. I mean, it's I don't want to use you as an example, but in a way, you are exactly what a lot of us go through, maybe not to that extent, you know, but so we really want to spend some time, and maybe Melissa, I don't know if you want to say anything more about that topic for next week, but
Yeah, just basically what you're saying. We'd like to come together as a group and just encourage one another and give examples, personal examples and maybe having examples from the group, of where we're at in that journey and where we're struggling and how we can, lift one another up and be a source of encouragement to each other. It's kind of
I will be flying out that morning for the memorial service for my favorite uncle.
oh,
So I will be gone, but the recording will be here and y'all know.
good. Yeah, and we'll try to capture a little bit of like what you said today. So we kind of
Super, thank you.
on that way. We did have a question in the chat, Hope, about agents. If I'm expanding my genres, what do I focus on? I'm still launching as an author.
Yeah, no, that's a good question because it totally depends on which agent you have. Because some agents are, okay, you have this genre, you're going to stick with it and that's it. And there are some agents who are more open to you doing other genres. I was told by another agent that the rule of thumb you probably should follow is to have 3 books in the same genre before branching out to other ones. Now, I don't know if that's true or not. I'm personally of the opinion that go where the Lord leads. And the Lord will open the right doors. So, and if you look at my bibliography, my genres are a little bit all over the place. But, I personally think that if you are feeling called and compelled to write a project, to go ahead and do it. It may end up sitting for a while, or you may get some bites. But it totally depends on which agent you go with, because some are a little bit stricter on that than others.
Okay.
I wanted to throw in while we're still on recording too that Hope and Alyssa have a book that's going to be coming out on pre-order here pretty soon. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that, Hope.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is the second book in our Sweet Romance series. All of them are standalones. And what essentially the series is a group of artists coming together to save something. So the first book followed the story of a picture book author and an illustrator writing a picture book together to save a nonprofit. And in this next book, we have a worship leader and a pianist coming together to win the town's music indie competition. So it's called Finding Harmony. A lot of it was actually inspired by my worship leader brother, who works in a church right now. So if you love all things music, definitely check it out. It should be going up for pre-order on May 1st.
Okay.
And its title again?
Finding Harmony.
Finding Harmony. That is super. Congratulations
Thank you.
Yeah.
on that.
And I've posted the links to their link tree so that you can kind of see where those pre-orders will be coming up.
Okay, thank you. Any final Johnny or Brandy wrap up then?
I would just say I always hated doing group projects in school because I couldn't control everything. And if someone didn't pull their weight, we got to see, I was really mad. And so, but now that we're grown-ups, I guess I could co-author with Jeannie if the two of us actually came up with a great idea, I'd try it because I know she would work hard too.
Well, we did kind of co-author together. We put a little mini thing years ago together. So
Years and years ago, that was fun. But I've been in that situation in school and I was really sick.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I was the same way. I was always the person who basically did 80% of the group project work. So I'm the same exact way.
Yeah. And I'm a deadline person. And so I tell you, the person that would meet a deadline, I just start going crazy. So.
Yeah, I go berserk if someone has to cancel on a meeting for whatever
Yeah.
reason, because I'm
Yeah.
so, you promised it, you got to do it.
On that. Why don't you wrap up, Johnny, then for us?
All right. Well, yes, we're so glad Hope was with us today to talk about co-authoring and about chat fiction, which I think was something new to a lot of us. So you never know what you're going to find out on Writers Chat. And so if you're here today, we are very thankful for that. And if you're watching the replay, we are very grateful for you too. And we invite you to join us on our Facebook page to see past episodes and also to join our Facebook group. Just search for Writers Chat and I promise we pop up. So we'll see y'all next week. Happy writing. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.